The first rays of dawn pierce through the shattered windows of an abandoned French farmhouse near Chartres. Major Klaus Weber, a weathered Wehrmacht logistics officer with 3 years of managing horse-drawn supply convoys, crouches behind a bullet-riddled wall. His field glasses sweep the countryside below, searching for the usual sight that has defined warfare for millennia: ox carts, horse-drawn wagons, the slow, predictable crawl of military supplies. But what Weber sees through those binoculars on this August 29th, 1944, morning defies everything he understands about the limits of military logistics. Stretching from horizon to horizon, an endless river of identical olive green trucks flows along the French highway below. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands, each one massive, each one loaded to capacity, each one moving with mechanical precision that makes Weber's hands shake as he adjusts his focus. "Mein Gott," he whispers, his breath fogging the lenses. Weber has spent his entire career calculating the logistics of war. He knows that his own 116th Panzer Division struggles to move 500 tons of supplies daily using their traditional horse-drawn wagons and the occasional fuel truck. He's seen German supply columns stretch for miles, thousands of horses, hundreds of wagons, moving at the pace that armies have moved since Caesar's time. But this is something else entirely. The American trucks below move at speeds that seem impossible for such massive vehicles. Each one carries what looks like 5 tons of cargo, more than his entire horse-drawn supply train can manage in a day. And they never stop. As one convoy disappears around a distant hill, another appears on the opposite horizon. The flow is continuous, mechanized, relentless. Weber pulls out his notepad with trembling fingers and begins to calculate. If each truck carries 5 tons, and he can count at least 50 trucks visible at any moment, and they're moving continuously. His pencil stops. The mathematics are staggering. These Americans are moving more supplies in a single hour than his entire division receives in a week. Through the drone of engines, he hears something that chills him more than the numbers: the sound of American voices. Young voices, many of them Black Americans, calling out to each other from the truck cabs as they navigate the convoy. These aren't elite troops or specialized units. These are support soldiers, supply drivers, men his Wehrmacht colleagues would never even consider capable of combat roles. Yet here they are, operating the most sophisticated logistics machine Weber has ever witnessed. As another endless column of trucks thunders past, Weber realizes he's not just observing a supply convoy. He's witnessing the future of warfare itself. A mechanized, industrial approach to military logistics that makes his army's methods look medieval by comparison. The question that will haunt him for the remainder of the war begins to form: how do you fight an enemy that can move mountains while you're still counting horses? To understand what Major Weber witnessed that morning, you have to step back 3 weeks to August 7th, 1944, when the German logistics officer still believed his army possessed the finest supply system in the world. Weber's confidence wasn't unfounded. For 3 years, he had managed the complex choreography of moving supplies across occupied Europe using a system perfected over centuries. His division relied on 4,000 horses, 800 wagons, and perhaps 200 motor vehicles. It was methodical, proven, efficient within its limitations. A typical German infantry division could sustain itself indefinitely as long as they had access to forage for their animals and clear roads for their wagons. But Weber didn't understand what the Americans had built across the Atlantic: an entirely mechanized military-industrial complex that was about to revolutionize warfare forever. 3,000 miles away in Normandy, another man was facing a very different kind of logistics crisis. Technical Sergeant Emmanuel Wilson Green, of the 3989th Motor Transport Company had just stepped off a transport ship onto Omaha Beach, and the smell of death still hung in the salt air 10 days after D-Day. Green, a Virginia native who had never left his home state before the war, stared at the massive pile of supplies stacking up on the beaches, mountains of ammunition crates, fuel drums stretching beyond the horizon, rations, medical supplies, spare parts, everything needed to supply over 1 million Allied soldiers now pushing inland. But there was a problem that would have seemed impossible to Major Weber's horse-drawn logistics. The supplies were moving too slowly. General George S. Patton's Third Army and Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges' First Army were advancing so rapidly across France, sometimes covering 80 miles in a single day, that they were literally outrunning their supply lines. These mechanized forces were consuming 800,000 gallons of gasoline daily. That's more fuel in one day than Weber's entire army group used in a month. By August 20th, Patton's tanks were grinding to a halt, not because of German resistance, but because they had no fuel. The great breakout from Normandy, the moment when Allied forces finally burst through German defenses, was threatened by something no general had ever faced before: an army moving too fast for its own supply system. Ernest Myers, a 22-year-old truck driver with the 3214th Quartermaster Service Company, remembered the desperation in his officers' voices during those critical days. "We wanted to make an impression for the people back home," Myers later recalled. "But how could we keep fighting if we couldn't get gas to the front?" The solution American commanders devised in a frantic 36-hour brainstorming session would have sounded like science fiction to Weber's traditional military mind. They would create a highway system exclusively for military supplies. They would commandeer every available truck, 6,000 of them. They would recruit 23,000 drivers, most of them African-American soldiers, who had been relegated to support roles because white commanders didn't believe they could fight. And they would operate this massive logistics machine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, moving supplies at a scale never before attempted in human history. On August 25th, 1944, the Red Ball Express began operations. The name came from American railroad tradition. Red Ball freight was priority cargo that moved on express schedules. But this wasn't a railroad. This was something entirely new: a mechanized supply highway that would stretch over 750 miles at its peak, with trucks moving continuously from the Normandy beaches to the advancing front lines. James Rookard, a 19-year-old from Maple Heights, Ohio, found himself behind the wheel of a 212-ton GMC truck loaded with 5 tons of ammunition, double the vehicle's rated capacity. He had received exactly 4 hours of truck driving instruction before being declared qualified for Red Ball duty. "General Patton wanted us to eat, sleep, and drive, but mostly drive," Rookard remembered. "We were told tout de suite, immediately, right now." That became our motto. The scale of the operation would have staggered Weber's mathematical mind. Military policemen were stationed at every intersection along the Red Ball routes, ensuring that no civilian or non-priority military traffic could slow the convoys. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep trucks rolling. Rest areas were established every 50 miles where drivers could grab coffee and a few hours of sleep before continuing their 54-hour round trips between Cherbourg and Chartres. But the most shocking aspect of the Red Ball Express wasn't its size, it was its speed. While Weber's horse-drawn wagons moved at walking pace, Red Ball drivers routinely exceeded 60 miles per hour despite official speed limits of 25 Newark. They stripped the governors from their engines, loaded ammunition boxes twice as high as safety regulations allowed, and drove through the night using only cat-eye blackout lights to avoid enemy detection. Master Sergeant Alfonso Campbell of the 520th Quartermaster Group remembered the surreal experience of those first weeks. "We could smell the stench of the dead from the Normandy beaches, he said. Bodies were still floating in the water, landmines remained everywhere. But we kept rolling, truck after truck, day and night. What Weber would observe on August 29th was the Red Ball Express at its absolute peak performance, a logistics machine operating at a scale that redefined what was possible in warfare. And driving those trucks, proving their courage under the most dangerous conditions imaginable, were African American soldiers who would forever change how America viewed both military logistics and racial capability. August 29th, 1944. ZO5 47 hours. The moment that would shatter every assumption Major Klaus Weber held about the limits of military supply. Through his field glasses, Weber watches in stunned silence as the 132nd Truck Company in the convoy passes below his observation post. He has been counting for over 2 hours now, and the flow hasn't stopped. Not once. Each company operates approximately 45 vehicles, which means Weber's pencil breaks under the pressure of his grip. Over 5,900 trucks are moving past this single checkpoint today, but numbers alone don't capture the shock of what he's witnessing. 3 miles ahead of Weber's position, Technical Sergeant Emmanuel Green downshifts his overloaded GMC as he approaches a sharp turn in the French countryside. Behind him, 5 tons of 105mm artillery shells shift against their tie-downs. Enough explosive power to level a city block. Ahead, the convoy stretches beyond the horizon like a mechanical river flowing toward the German lines. Green's assistant driver, Private Johnny Washington from Mississippi, peers through the passenger side cat-eye blackout light, trying to maintain visual contact with the truck ahead. "Sarge, you think the Germans know what's coming?" Washington asks, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. Green, a Virginia farmer before the war who had never driven anything bigger than a pickup truck, adjusts his grip on the steering wheel. His knuckles are white, not from fear of enemy fire, but from the responsibility of keeping this massive logistics machine moving. "Son," he says, "I don't think they could imagine what's coming, even if we told them." Weber would agree. Through his binoculars, he watches Green's convoy execute a maneuver that seems impossible for vehicles of this size and weight. When the lead truck signals a route change, over 200 vehicles behind it adjust course with military precision. No confusion, no delays, no horses balking or wagons getting stuck in mud. The efficiency is terrifying. Weber pulls out his situation map and begins marking truck positions, trying to understand the scope of what he's observing. The convoy he's watching is just one of dozens operating simultaneously across France. Radio intercepts from his intelligence unit have revealed that the Americans are calling this operation the Red Ball Express, and it's delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies daily to the advancing Allied forces. 12,000 tons. Weber's entire army group receives perhaps 2,000 tons per day when their horse-drawn supply system is functioning perfectly. The Americans are moving 6 times that amount with mechanical precision that never stops, never rests, never slows for weather or terrain. But what shocks Weber most isn't the scale, it's who's driving these trucks. James Ruckert, the 19-year-old from Ohio, navigates his ammunition-laden truck around a destroyed German Panzer IV, its turret blown clean off by Allied artillery. Dead German soldiers lie scattered around the tank, and Ruckert forces himself not to look as he steers past. Behind him, his assistant driver, an 18-year-old named Marcus from Detroit, checks their cargo manifest. "Next stop is 3rd Armored Division," Marcus calls out over the engine noise. "They're holding at Meaux, waiting for ammunition resupply." Ruckert nods, pressing the accelerator harder. The official speed limit is 25 km, but every Red Ball driver knows the real rule: get there fast or men die. His speedometer shows 55 fiki a meurtres on a narrow French road that was never designed for this kind of traffic. Weber watches Ruckert's truck disappear around a bend and realizes something that chills him more than the numbers. These aren't elite troops. The intelligence reports describe them as Negro support personnel, soldiers his own Wehrmacht considers barely suitable for labor details. Yet here they are, operating the most sophisticated logistics operation in military history, driving through combat zones at night, delivering ammunition to the front lines under enemy fire. Ernest Myers, driving his fuel tanker 400 yards behind Ruckert, remembered later what it felt like to be part of something that was changing warfare forever. "We knew we were doing something special," he said. "White soldiers at the front would see us coming and cheer. They knew those black drivers meant they could keep fighting." But Weber doesn't yet understand the personal cost of what he's witnessing. At 0630 hours, as the sun climbs higher, Weber observes something that reveals the true scope of American determination. A Red Ball truck has broken down on the highway below, transmission failure from the massive overloading. Within minutes, a maintenance crew arrives with a wrecker. But instead of delaying the convoy, the maintenance team simply pushes the disabled truck off the road and continues the flow of supplies. The truck is expendable. The mission is not. Weber's radio crackles with a report from his own supply officer. "Herr Major, our horse-drawn ammunition column is delayed again. The animals are exhausted, and we've lost 3 wagons to Allied airstrikes. We'll be lucky to deliver 50 tons today." 50 tons. Weber looks down at the American convoy still flowing past his position and does the mathematics that will haunt him for years. In the time it takes his horses to rest, the Americans have moved enough supplies to sustain an entire army group for a week. Alphonso Campbell, driving his supply truck loaded with medical supplies and rations, represents something Weber's military experience can't process. Campbell had landed on Omaha Beach just weeks after D-Day, when bodies were still floating in the water and landmines remained a serious threat. But instead of being paralyzed by the horror, Campbell and thousands of men like him had embraced their role in this mechanized revolution. "We were part of something bigger than ourselves," Campbell later recalled. "Every ton we moved, every mile we drove, brought the war closer to ending." Weber finally lowers his binoculars as the last visible truck disappears toward the front lines. In his 3 years managing Wehrmacht logistics, he has never seen anything remotely comparable to what just passed below his observation post. The Americans haven't just created a better supply system, they've created a different kind of army entirely. His hands shake as he writes his report to division headquarters. "Enemy logistics capability exceeds all previous estimates. Recommend immediate reassessment of our ability to sustain defensive operations against this level of material superiority." But Weber knows his report will change nothing. How do you fight an enemy that can move 12,000 tons of supplies daily while your own forces struggle to feed their horses? How do you counter an industrial war machine that operates around the clock, driven by soldiers who have transformed military logistics from horse pace to highway speed? As the sound of truck engines fades in the distance, Weber realizes he has witnessed more than a supply convoy. He has seen the future of warfare, mechanized, integrated, and operated by men his army never considered capable of such sophisticated military operations. The Red Ball Express isn't just delivering supplies to American forces. It's delivering a message that the war is already over. Germany just doesn't know it yet. Major Weber's report reached Wehrmacht High Command on September 1, 1944, 3 days after he witnessed the Red Ball Express at peak performance. By then, it was already too late. The numbers Weber documented told a story of inevitable defeat. 132 truck companies, 5,158 vehicles, 12,342 tons delivered in a single day. But his superiors, still thinking in terms of traditional horse-drawn logistics, couldn't grasp the strategic implications of what he had observed. While German commanders debated the accuracy of Weber's reports, the Red Ball Express continued its relentless operation. For 82 consecutive days, from August 25 through November 16, 1944, this mechanized logistics machine delivered 412,193 tons of supplies to Allied forces advancing toward Germany. That's more material than the entire German war economy could produce in 6 months. Technical Sergeant Emanuel Green returned to Virginia after the war, but he never forgot the moment he stepped over dead German soldiers while delivering ammunition to the front lines. He named his oldest son after the NCO, who was severely injured by a landmine while Green was repairing his truck nearby. For Green, the Red Ball Express proved that African American soldiers could perform any military task with distinction, despite facing discrimination from their own army. "We were fighting 2 wars," Green reflected years later, one against the Germans and one against the prejudice that said we couldn't do the job. The Red Ball Express won both battles. Ernest Myers, the 22-year-old driver from the 3214th Quartermaster Service Company, understood the historical significance of what he had participated in. "We wanted to make an impression for the people back home," he said, "and we did. We proved that logistics could win wars and that black soldiers were essential to victory." The impact of the Red Ball Express extended far beyond its immediate military mission. Time magazine called it part of the miracle of supply and noted that this miracle was in the American tradition, a tradition the Germans have never really understood. It was begotten of a people accustomed to great spaces, to transcontinental railways, to nationwide trucking chains, to endless roads and millions of automobiles. That assessment revealed the fundamental truth Weber had witnessed. The Red Ball Express represented more than military logistics. It demonstrated American industrial and organizational superiority that made Allied victory inevitable. The contrast with German capabilities was stark and decisive. While the Red Ball Express operated 6,000 mechanized trucks around the clock, the German army relied on 2.8 million horses for 80% of its logistics. A typical German division had 10 times more horses than motor vehicles and moved at the pace armies had moved for centuries. Even as late as 1944, German supply columns looked virtually identical to those of Napoleon's Grande Armée. James Ruckert, the 19-year-old from Ohio, who had feared for his life while driving ammunition through combat zones, gained a broader perspective on his service years later. "My worst memories were seeing trucks get blown up and being afraid that I might get killed," he recalled. "But we were part of something that changed the world. We proved that America could project power anywhere on Earth through superior logistics." Colonel John S.D. Eisenhower, son of the Supreme Allied Commander and a veteran of the European campaign, provided the ultimate assessment. The spectacular nature of the advance through France was due in as great a measure to the men who drove the Red Ball trucks as to those who drove the tanks. Without it, the advance across France could not have been made. The Red Ball Express established principles that continue to influence military operations today. Modern armies understand that logistics determine what's possible on the battlefield, that mechanized supply systems provide decisive advantages over traditional methods, and that the soldiers who operate those systems deserve recognition as combat heroes. The parallels to contemporary conflicts are striking. In Ukraine today, logistics capabilities determine military outcomes just as they did in 1944. Supply line disruption, mechanized transport systems, and the ability to sustain operations over extended distances remain decisive factors in modern warfare. But perhaps the most important legacy of the Red Ball Express is what it revealed about American society's capacity for transformation under pressure. An army that began the war with segregated units and limited faith in African American soldiers created a logistics system operated primarily by black drivers who proved essential to Allied victory. Major Weber's final intelligence report, discovered in Wehrmacht archives after the war, contained a prescient observation. The Americans have not simply built a better army, they have built a different kind of civilization, one that can mobilize industrial resources, integrate diverse populations, and project power across global distances. This is not an enemy we can defeat through traditional military means. Weber was right. The Red Ball Express didn't just deliver supplies. It delivered the future of warfare, powered by American innovation and driven by heroes who transform military logistics forever. Subscribe to learn more untold stories of the soldiers who changed history through courage, innovation, and determination that shaped the modern world.